God, there are moments when I feel like I can't go on anymore. Then I keep trying, but I don't see results. That I take steps, but everything feels heavier than I expected. And in the middle of that exhaustion today, I come before you. Not to give up, but to ask you not to let me go. Because there are parts of me that want to stop. That want to stop fighting. That just want to let go of everything I've been holding in silence. And yet something inside of me knows that it's not time to give up. That it's not time to walk away. That this is not the end, even if it feels like it is. Your word in Galatians 6-9 says that we should not grow weary in doing good. Because in due time, we will reap if we do not lose heart. And today I hold on to that truth, not as a phrase that I repeat, but as a direction that I need to understand. Because the exhaustion is real. The frustration is real. The silence is real. And there are moments when it feels like nothing is moving forward. When it feels like everything stays the same despite the effort. Despite the consistency. Despite continuing even when there are no visible signs of change. And that is where my mind begins to question whether it is worth continuing. Father, there is an internal struggle that many times no one sees. A silent battle where I keep taking steps, even though inside I feel exhausted. Where I keep trying even though I don't have clarity. Where I keep believing even though I don't see immediate evidence. And in that tension is where I need you the most. Because this is not only about strength, this is not only about discipline. This is about remaining when everything inside of me wants to stop. And I know that without you I cannot remain firm in that place. Your word in Isaiah 42:29 says that, you give strength to the weary and multiply the strength of the one who has none. And today I recognize that this is me. Someone who has reached a point where my own strength is not enough. Where continuing does not depend on what I have, but on what you are able to do in me. Because moving forward is not only a decision, it is a constant dependence on your power. It is recognizing that I do not have what I need on my own, but that in you I can remain. There are moments when the exhaustion does not come from what I do, but from what I am waiting for, from what has not yet arrived, from what has not yet changed, from what has not yet been resolved. And that weighs on me, that drains me. That weakens my focus and lowers my motivation. But today I do not want to move based on what I feel. I want to remain firm in what you have said, because I understand that giving up is not always a sudden decision. Many times it is a slow process where I stop insisting, where I stop believing, where I slowly stop moving forward. Your word in 2 Thessalonians 3:13 says that we should not grow weary in doing good. And I see that this instruction is repeated. Because you know that exhaustion is part of the journey. You know that there will be moments when continuing will not be easy. You know that there will be days when everything will feel heavier. And even so, you call us not to stop, not because we ignore what we feel, but because we trust what you are doing even when we cannot see it. Father, today I do not come to deny my exhaustion. I come to give it to you. Because I know that I cannot carry it on my own. I cannot keep accumulating weight without it affecting the way I think, the way I act, and the way I move forward. And that is why today I decide not to carry this in silence. I decide to bring it before you with clarity, with honesty, without pretending that everything is fine, when I know there are areas where I need your intervention. Your word in Hebrews 12:3 says that we should consider him who endured such opposition from sinners against himself, so that our spirit will not grow weary to the point of giving up. And I understand that the right focus changes and that when I look to you instead of focusing only on what I face, something inside of me becomes stronger. Not because the circumstances change immediately, but because my perspective aligns with something greater than what I am living. Today I ask you to guard my mind from thoughts that push me to give up. Do not allow frustration to become a decision. Do not allow exhaustion to become abandonment. And do not allow the lack of visible results to make me let go of what you have called me to hold, because I understand that many times the process is not fully seen from where I stand, but that does not mean that it is not happening. Father, help me to continue when I don't feel like it, to move forward when I don't see clarity, to hold on when everything feels heavy, and to remain firm when the easiest thing would be to stop. Because I do not want to be someone who abandons what you began. I do not want to be someone who lets go out of exhaustion what you have not yet finished. And I do not want to live based on what I feel in a moment, but based on the truth that you are still working even when I cannot perceive it. Lord, as I remain before you, I recognize that giving up is rarely a sudden decision. It is something that develops quietly when the weight of continuing begins to feel heavier than the hope of what lies ahead. And I do not want to ignore that process within me, because I understand that discouragement does not always announce itself clearly. It often settles into the way I think, into the way I measure progress, into the way I interpret silence, and into the way I respond when things do not move at the pace I expected. There are moments where the effort feels consistent, but the results feel distant. Where the intention remains, but the strength begins to fade. Where I continue moving but without the same clarity I once had. And in those moments, it becomes easy to question whether continuing is worth it. Whether staying in this process still makes sense. And whether what I am holding on to will ever produce what I believed it would. Your word in Galatians 6-9 speaks directly into this tension, reminding me not to grow weary in doing what is right. Because there is a harvest appointed to its time, not to mine. And I understand that this instruction is not given in moments of ease. It is given for moments like this, where persistence feels costly, where consistency feels draining, and where remaining in place requires more than motivation. It requires alignment with something deeper than what I feel. I recognize that weariness is not always physical, it is often internal. It is carried in thoughts that question, in expectations that remain unmet, and in the quiet pressure of continuing without visible confirmation. And I do not want to allow that internal weight to determine my direction. There are areas in my life where I have been consistent, where I have stayed committed, where I have continued even when it was not convenient. And yet there are still spaces where I do not see movement, where things remain unchanged, where the outcome has not matched the effort, and that creates tension within me. Because part of me wants to measure progress by what is visible, by what can be confirmed, by what can be validated in real time. But your word redirects that mindset, teaching me that not everything develops in a way that is immediately seen. Not everything produces in the moment it is planted, and not everything reveals its outcome while I am still in the middle of the process. Your word in Ecclesiastes 3:1 declares that there is a time for everything, and a season for every purpose under heaven. And I understand that what I am walking through is not random. It is not undefined, and it is not outside of your awareness, even if it feels prolonged from my perspective. There is a difference between delay and abandonment, and I do not want to confuse the two. Because just because something has not happened yet, does not mean it will not happen. And just because I have not seen results does not mean the process is without purpose. Help me remain anchored in that distinction, so that I do not interpret waiting as failure, and I do not interpret silence as absence. Lord, there are moments when continuing feels like repetition without reward, where I keep doing what is right but the outcome does not reflect it, where I keep showing up but nothing appears to change. And that kind of repetition can drain the desire to keep going, because the mind begins to look for evidence that what I am doing is producing something. And when that evidence is not clear, the temptation to stop becomes stronger. Your word in Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And I understand that what sustains me in this process is not what I can verify with my eyes, but what I choose to trust even when it is not visible. Guard my thinking from reducing everything to what I can measure. Guard my expectations from being tied only to immediate results. And guard my perspective from becoming limited to what I can confirm in the present moment. Because I understand that if I rely only on what I see, I will eventually lose the strength to continue in what I cannot yet see. Your word in Psalm 27:13 declares a confidence in seeing the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And I hold on to that confidence, not as something distant, but as something that is still unfolding, even if I have not reached it yet. There are moments where the exhaustion is not loud, but steady, not overwhelming, but persistent. And that kind of exhaustion can be more dangerous because it does not force a decision. It slowly influences one. It gradually weakens the desire to continue. It slowly reshapes the mindset until stopping feels reasonable. Until letting go feels justified. Until walking away feels like relief. And I do not want to reach that point without recognizing what is happening within me. I bring that before you now, not after I have already stepped back, but while I am still aware, while I am still present, while I still have the ability to choose alignment over retreat. Your word in Isaiah 42:31 speaks of those who wait on the Lord renewing their strength, mounting up with wings like eagles, running and not growing weary, walking and not fainting. And I understand that waiting on you is not passive. It is an act of reliance. It is a deliberate posture. It is a decision to remain connected even when I feel drained, even when I feel uncertain, even when I feel stretched beyond what I expected. Renewal does not come from stepping away from what you have given. It comes from remaining connected to you while I continue in it. And I ask that you strengthen that connection within me. Help me not to abandon what still requires time, not to release what still requires formation, and not to step away from what you are still shaping. Because I understand that leaving too early does not remove the process. It only interrupts it. And I do not want to restart something that should have been completed if I had remained. Keep me steady in my thinking, consistent in my direction, and grounded in your truth, so that I do not move based on fluctuation, but remain anchored in what you have spoken. As I continue forward, I choose to remain, not because everything is resolved, not because everything is clear, but because I trust that what you have begun is still in motion, that what you have planted is still developing, and that what feels slow is not without purpose. I choose not to give up, not because I feel strong, but because I am choosing to rely on a strength that does not come from me, but from you, and in that dependence I remain, not withdrawn, not discouraged, but aligned with the truth that this process is not wasted. This effort is not empty, and this path is not leading nowhere, even if I cannot yet see where it ends. Father, as I continue before you, I recognize that perseverance is not sustained by emotion. It is sustained by alignment, and there are moments where what I feel does not support what I know I must continue doing. Moments where the weight of delay, resistance, and uncertainty begins to press in a way that challenges my stability. Not because the path has changed, but because my endurance is being tested in ways I did not anticipate. I understand that continuing is not always about having clarity. It is often about remaining when clarity is absent, about holding direction when confirmation is not visible, and about maintaining position when everything within me seeks relief through withdrawal rather than strength through persistence. Your word in Hebrews 12:2-1 speaks of laying aside every weight and the sin that so easily entangles, and running with endurance the race set before us. And I see that endurance is not passive. It requires intention. It requires awareness, and it requires the removal of what weakens the ability to continue. There are weights that are not always visible, thoughts that drain strength, expectations that create pressure, and internal conversations that shift focus away from what you have established. And I ask that you expose anything within me that is making this path heavier than it needs to be. Anything that is adding resistance beyond what the process already requires. I recognize that not everything that feels heavy is meant to be carried, and not everything that occupies my mind is aligned with what you have spoken, and I do not want to continue forward while holding on to thoughts that weaken my endurance, or perspectives that distort my understanding of what is happening. Your word in 2 Coríntios 4:16-18 reminds me not to lose heart. Though outwardly things may seem worn down, inwardly there is renewal taking place, and that what is seen is temporary while what is unseen is eternal. And I understand that if I anchor myself only in what I can observe, I will eventually lose the strength to continue in what is still forming beyond my perception. There are moments where progress is not measured by visible change, but by continued obedience. Where movement is not defined by results, but by refusal to step back. And I do not want to misinterpret stillness as stagnation or delay as failure. Because I understand that the absence of visible progress does not mean the absence of development. Your word in Habakkuk 2-3 declares that the vision awaits its appointed time. That it speaks of the end and will not prove false. And though it lingers, I am instructed to wait for it. Because it will surely come and will not delay beyond what has been established. And I take that as a correction to my impatience. Because what feels delayed to me is not delayed to you. Father, strengthen my ability to remain without needing immediate confirmation, to continue without requiring constant reassurance, and to move forward without depending on visible validation. Because I understand that endurance is proven in the absence of those things. There is a discipline in continuing when there is no applause, no evidence, and no immediate outcome. And that discipline is not sustained by willpower alone. It is sustained by trust, by alignment, and by a perspective that is anchored beyond what I feel in a moment. Your word in James 1:12 says that blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. Because having stood the test, that person will receive what has been promised. And I understand that perseverance is not only about reaching an outcome. It is about who I become in the process of remaining. It is about what is formed within me while I refuse to step away. And it is about maintaining alignment, even when the process stretches longer than expected. Guard my internal dialogue from turning against what I must continue. Guard my thoughts from creating arguments that justify stepping back. And guard my perspective from narrowing to the point where I can only see what is lacking instead of recognizing what is still being established. Your word in Psalm 37:7 instructs me to be still before you and wait patiently. Not in frustration, not in resignation, but in a posture that remains grounded, that does not react impulsively, and that does not abandon direction because of temporary pressure. There is a difference between stopping because something is complete, and stopping because something feels difficult, and I do not want to confuse those two. I do not want to step away from something that is still in motion simply because it requires more than I anticipated. I understand that what you establish is not sustained by comfort. It is sustained through process. And that process often requires more endurance than I initially expected. And I ask that you adjust my expectations so that I am not surprised by the cost of continuing. As I remain in this moment, I choose not to withdraw, not to reduce my effort, and not to step back into what is easier but misaligned. I choose to stay in what you have placed before me. Not because it feels light, but because it is right. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is aligned. And not because I see the full outcome, but because I trust that the outcome exists beyond what I can currently perceive. Keep me steady in direction, clear in thought, and anchored in truth, so that my movement is not determined by pressure, but by purpose. And as I continue forward, let this not be driven by emotion, but by alignment. Not by impulse but by conviction, and not by what is visible in this moment, but by the certainty that what you have begun continues to develop even when I can not yet see its completion, so that I remain, not out of force, but out of understanding, not out of obligation, but out of alignment, and not out of fear, but out of trust that you are still working within what I am choosing not to abandon. Father, as this time comes to a close, I do not want this moment to remain only as words spoken. I want it to settle within me as direction, as clarity, and as a decision that continues beyond this point. Because I understand that the real test of endurance is not what I say here, but what I choose when I step back into the flow of my day. There will be moments ahead where the same pressure returns, where the same thoughts attempt to resurface, where the same weight tries to press in again, and I do not want to face those moments unprepared or disconnected from what you have already brought into awareness within me. Your word in Philippians 1-6 reminds me that he who began a good work will carry it on to completion. And I hold on to that not as something distant, but as something active, something that continues even when I do not feel it. something that does not stop because my strength fluctuates, and something that is not dependent on my consistency alone, but on your faithfulness to complete what you have started. I do not want to measure progress only by what I can see in front of me. I want to remain anchored in the understanding that what you begin does not remain unfinished. Even if the process extends beyond what I expected, there are moments ahead that will not feel different immediately. Moments where nothing seems to shift externally. Moments where the same effort will be required again. And I understand that perseverance is not proven in one decision. It is established through repeated alignment, through choosing again what I have already chosen here, through remaining even when the initial clarity fades and routine begins to take over. Your word in Luke 9:62 says that no one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom. And I understand that this is not about perfection. It is about direction. It is about not turning back when the path becomes demanding. It is about maintaining forward movement even when the effort remains consistent. Father, I ask that you fix my focus so that I do not begin to look back. Not in regret, not in comparison, and not in desire for what feels easier but is no longer aligned. I do not want to move forward physically while my attention drifts backward mentally, because I understand that where my focus goes, my strength follows. And I need my strength to remain aligned with what is ahead, not divided by what I have already left behind. Your word in Timothy 4:27 speaks of finishing the race, keeping the faith, and completing the course. And I understand that this is not about speed, it is about completion. It is about remaining until what has been assigned is fulfilled. And I do not want to approach what you have given me with a mindset that looks for the quickest exit. I want to approach it with a mindset that remains until it is complete, until it has served its purpose, until what needs to be formed within me has been established. I recognize that there will be moments where continuing feels repetitive, where showing up feels routine, where nothing appears to change. And I understand that those are often the moments where the decision to remain becomes most important, because consistency is not proven in what is new. It is proven in what continues without change. Your word in Colossians 1:11 speaks of being strengthened with all power according to your glorious might, so that I may have great endurance and patience. And I ask for that strengthening, not as something temporary, but as something that sustains me beyond this moment. Guard me from making decisions based on temporary pressure, from stepping away because of present discomfort, and from reducing my effort because the process takes longer than I expected. Because I understand that leaving too soon does not remove the process. It only delays what must still be completed. Help me remain steady, not reacting to every shift in how I feel, not adjusting direction based on temporary weight, but continuing in what has been established, even when it requires more than I anticipated. As I move forward, I choose to carry what has been formed here, not as something separate from my day, but as something that shapes how I think, how I respond, and how I continue. I choose to remain, not out of obligation, but out of understanding, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary, and not because I have all the answers, but because I trust the one who does. Keep my mind clear, my focus steady, and my direction aligned, so that when the moment comes where I would normally step back, I instead remain. When the thought comes that suggests stopping, I instead continue, and when the weight feels familiar, I do not interpret it as a signal to quit, but as a moment to stay grounded in what you have already confirmed. Let this not end as a moment of intention, but continue as a pattern of movement, so that what I have chosen here is reflected in how I live beyond this point, and so that I remain, not because everything becomes easier, but because I have chosen not to give up. Amen.